Hey Stain Gang, this is Snail with Stained Glass Stories. As a channel, we've spent a lot of time examining the shoegaze genre from a variety of perspectives. We've done documentaries of shoegaze bands, explored shoegaze from different nations, and even spoken directly with shoegaze artists. Today, we want to take a step back and look at some of the music that contributed to the development of the genre. As a group, we decided to select 8 albums that we think influenced shoegaze. Apparently 8 was too low of a number though, so we ended up with a list of 12 albums and 1 song, ranging from the mid-60s to the late 80s. We think this list strikes the right balance between well-known releases and some others that you may not be familiar with. However, what all of these releases have in common is that they played a part in defining shoegaze. So without further ado, here are 12 albums and 1 song that influenced the shoegaze genre. The Ronettes, presenting the fabulous Ronettes, 1964. Ever fallen in love with someone you shouldn't have? Presenting the fabulous Ronettes captures the ethereal feeling of love so profoundly that it would radically change the trajectory of pop music for the next 60 years. Seriously, Brian Wilson, more on him later, compared the track Be My Baby to Einstein's theory of relativity.
Like walking in the rain.
Producer and songwriter for the album, Phil Spector, is a complicated figure. Though he's an obvious douchebag, his wall of sound technique created a rich and dense atmosphere that was an important precursor to shoegaze. He was able to create this sound by recruiting dozens of musicians, oftentimes with 2 or more of them playing the same instrument. Presenting the Fabulous Ronettes by the Ronettes is the quintessential example of this unorthodox recording technique. This 1964 album is the only release by the group, but it would lay the groundwork not only for shoegaze, but for pop music as a whole. The Byrds, Fifth Dimension, 1966. Remember that wall of sound thing we were talking about earlier? Combine that with the emerging psychedelia of the mid-60s to create a record that would significantly contribute to the rise of shoegaze. Shoegaze groups My Bloody Valentine, Slowdive, and Ride have all acknowledged the Byrds as influencing their sound. Throughout the second half of the 60s, the Byrds would create a creative streak of albums. Fifth Dimension captures a transition from Bob Dylan-inspired folk rock to psychedelia. Less than 30 minutes long, the album ponders Einstein's theory of relativity. That's the second time I brought that up. And whether we can communicate with aliens through radio broadcasting. 8 Miles High is one of the highlights of this record, notable for its 12-string guitar solos inspired by John Coltrane's saxophone playing. Ravi Shankar's sitar playing was an additional influence, although the song doesn't actually feature a sitar. The hypnotic droning sound that can be heard throughout this record would contribute to the dreamy shoegaze music in the next few decades. The Velvet Underground and Nico. The Velvet Underground and Nico, 1967. The Velvet Underground were quite revolutionary in their day and age. We're talking about the late 60s, where singing about topics like drug addiction or sexual exploration weren't quite as prevalent. Their songwriting was equally unconventional, following a raw and rather minimalistic approach to music which reflected the oftentimes nihilistic nature of their lyrical themes. Just like many other monumental works in music history, The Velvet Underground and Nico wasn't a commercial success by the time it released. In fact, it was seen as rather obscure and provocative. But as time evolved, bands from all ends of the spectrum of rock music would find common ground in being inspired by their eclectic sound. Their use of feedback and drony textures, like the iconic sound of distorted viola on songs like Heroin and Venus in Furs, were precursors to the types of atmospheric landscapes that challenged the boundaries of a conventional use of instruments, that later would also become important trademarks of shoegaze and adjacent genres. It's been widely debated whether or not the album's folky opener Sunday Morning could be considered the first ever dream pop song, due to its subdued and ethereal character. The Beach Boys, All I Wanna Do, 1970. What if I told you that the Beach Boys recorded the first dream pop song? Though Brian Wilson dismissed 1970s All I Wanna Do as boring, the production was arguably more than a decade ahead of its time. From their album Sunflower, the heavily reverberated production creates a sort of hazy warmth. Carl Wilson produced this song, making extensive use of overdubbing to create a dense, dreamlike effect. It seemed that few recognized its brilliance at the time, as it was soon forgotten, until it was sort of re-evaluated in the 2000s. As groups like the Radio Department, Beach House, and Panda Bear began to make a name for themselves, the song would be acknowledged as an important precursor to the dream pop sound.
To the center of the city in the night, waiting for you.
Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, 1979. It's hard to imagine Unknown Pleasures wasn't a commercial success when it released, given the fact that they not only pioneered post-punk, but would also continue to have a lasting impact on various genres that would only emerge in the following decades. While it predates the genre by many years, its raw production technique and sonic innovation have been critically acclaimed by many shoegaze artists.
Where will it end? Where will it end?
Post-punk and shoegaze are capable of making a magnificent blend, as it has been proven numerous times by bands like A Place to Bury Strangers, the KVB, or the Horrors, to name a few. There are still echoes of the moodiness and raw nerve nature in all of these band sounds that can still be partly traced back to Joy Division's legacy. Unknown Pleasures has garnered quite the cult-like following, with its abstract cover art of a pulsar graph remaining iconic to this day. Siouxsie and the Banshees, A Kiss in the Dreamhouse, 1982. Despite the fact that Siouxsie Sue herself wasn't fond of the goth label at all, you can't help but have her in mind when you think about the goth and post-punk movement of the 80s, that overall would hugely influence genres such as shoegaze later on. Many band members of proto-gaze and shoegaze bands like Cocteau Twins, Slowdive, or Cranes are in fact coming from a background of growing up with goth culture and music, leading them to incorporate these influences into the sound of their own bands. A Kiss in the Dreamhouse features haunting vocals, catchy, groovy bass lines, and heavy rhythms, making an encompassing and almost cinematic experience.
It's a slow dance. When you dance slow.
The biggest standout songs might be Cascade and Slowdive. It is a common misconception, though, that the band Slowdive was named after a song on A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. In fact, lead singer Rachel Goswell stated in an interview with Curious Creatures that, being a devoted Siouxsie and the Banshees fan herself, she was opposed to the idea of Slowdive sharing a name with a single by one of her favorite bands, but she was outvoted by her fellow band members. The Cure, Pornography, 1982. The Cure dipped into quite a variety of different genres throughout their discography, ranging from gothic rock and post-punk, which were mostly predominant on their earlier albums, to the experimental and psychedelic sounds of The Top, and to the catchy beats of Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. The Cure is a band that is probably very familiar to anyone who has ever stepped foot into alternative music territory. Related to shoegaze, Pornography is one of those records that are named most often, though. It's an album that's very dark and gloomy in nature, with thick textures, wailing guitars, and drones, accompanied by heavy, pulsating drums throughout. Many of the first-wave shoegaze bands like My Bloody Valentine and Slowdive are admittedly huge fans of The Cure, but the appreciation seems to be mutual. The band's lead singer Robert Smith expressed his love for shoegaze and proto-shoegaze numerous times. In the 2014 documentary Beautiful Noise, he recalls listening to Treasure by the Cocteau Twins while getting ready for his wedding. He's also stated Loveless to be within his top 10 favorite albums of all time. Hüsker Dü, Zen Arcade, 1984. Hüsker Dü are one of those iconic bands that were rooted in the early punk and hardcore punk scene of the late 70s to early 80s. The songs on their early records were mostly rather short and aggressive, reflecting their punk background. But the bands would soon branch out from that into territories like post-hardcore and noise rock. Zen Arcade neatly merges punk intensity with melodic complexity, and while it might not be as much of a direct influence on shoegaze like some of the other albums mentioned here, we felt like it deserved a spot on the list for playing a significant role in shaping the indie and alternative rock landscape of the 80s. It's an album that will probably speak to anyone in search of authentic and explorative music that transcends the boundaries of conventional genres. They seem to have somewhat of a legendary status within the independent music scene, so it's no surprise that shoegaze bands like Ride or My Bloody Valentine have acknowledged Hüsker Dü as an influence on their music. Cocteau Twins, Treasure, 1984. You know, there were several Cocteau Twins releases we could go with. If you were at all familiar with the history of shoegaze, you knew that they'd be in here at some point. While the 1986 EP, Love's Easy Tears, probably sounds closest to a proto-shoegaze record, we decided to choose the 1984 studio album Treasure. Though the Twins themselves have been critical of the record, we disagree with the assessment. This is the album where they completed their transition from a post-punk inspired outfit to a unique ethereal sound. Liz's vocals were completely phonetic at this point, embracing mood over traditional lyricism. Robin's guitar textures have a mystical quality, creating mood like an impressionistic painter with visible brushstrokes. This is also the first studio album with Simon, who further encouraged experimentation and added a new vibrant dimension to their sound. It seems like the Cocteau Twins are operating on a different level of consciousness with Treasure, and it is such a blissful experience to join them there. The Jesus and Mary Chain, Psychocandy, 1985. While often referred to as a proto-shoegaze or noise pop record, one could argue that Psychocandy might be one of the first albums to feature most of the key ingredients of what would later become the quintessential shoegaze sound. While it starts off with a conventional 60s pop beat on Just Like Honey, which sounds oddly similar to the Ronettes' Be My Baby, it soon transcends into a 40-minute long wall of noise and distortion, drony and often abrasive in nature, especially notable on songs like Taste the Floor or Taste of Cindy.
Just like a boy is made, just like the taste.
The Rolling Stone magazine once referred to it as bubblegum pop drowned in feedback, which to this day sounds like a description you could attribute to a lot of shoegaze albums. Taking influence from a wide range of genres and artists, ranging from the Velvet Underground to Ramones, they managed to create a sound that lay path for structures that can be found in a lot of records within the alternative rock realm. You will most likely have a hard time coming around a shoegaze band that doesn't cite the Jesus and Mary Chain as one of their primary influences. A primary industry, Ultramarine, 1986. Ultramarine by A Primary Industry is an album that we think deserves more recognition. This album is peculiar for a few reasons. For one, it's the only album by the group, who would disband the year after it was released. RYM also has it listed as the first shoegaze album. For some reason, this is where they decide to draw the line between proto-gaze and shoegaze. We think it falls more into the proto-gaze camp, but at the end of the day, it's difficult to pinpoint the eclectic sound of this album to any sort of genre. This is a very strange and experimental record. It's cold and electronic, like if Robin Guthrie produced an industrial album. Throughout the album, one can hear harsh guitar jangles and an aggressive drum machine. Some tracks lack any sort of rhythm and float into ambient territory. There is a female vocalist, but the project is primarily instrumental. While mostly forgotten nowadays, Ultramarine was visionary not only to shoegaze music, but to electronic techno groups like Seafield as well.
Rabbit falls away from me. I guess
Dinosaur Jr., You're Living All Over Me, 1987. Dinosaur Jr., similarly to bands like Hüsker Dü, fall in the vein of noisy, guitar-driven alternative rock. Their influence has of course been noted by early 90s shoegaze pioneers My Bloody Valentine, Slowdive, and Ride, who are nowadays often cited as being the holy trinity of the genre.
Thought I knew you, stuck out my hand.
Echoes of their distortion-heavy alt-rock blend can be found in the sound of Swerve Driver, as well as a branch of bands like Whir, Nothing, or Ringo Death Star that would emerge as shoegaze revivals started to happen in the early 2010s. These bands took a modern approach to the more alt-rock adjacent, sometimes rather grungy, style of shoegaze that is often coined new gaze. You're Living All Over Me features a fusion of slurry, buried vocals, and heavily distorted guitars, which integrate seamlessly with the overall lo-fi production quality of the album.
Looking for a ride to your secret location where the kids are setting up a
Sonic Youth, Daydream Nation, 1988. While Sonic Youth are clearly more on the noise rock side, they undoubtedly can be seen as a huge influence for shoegaze. Starting off as a no-wave band in their early days, they soon started exploring alternate tunings and textures, pushing the boundaries of conventional guitar playing and creating music that was based on both noise and experimentation. Daydream Nation might be their most well-known record and can be seen as a hallmark of early 90s indie music.
I grew up in a shotgun road, sliding down the hill. I fought with the big machines.
While a lot of bands within the British shoegaze scene of the early 90s were clearly inspired by 80s gothic rock or the ethereal sound of the Cocteau twins, Sonic Youth, founded in New York City, brought back some of the almost punkish elements to the scene. My Bloody Valentine's Kevin Shields expressed being attracted by the rawness and upfrontness of their sound. Also, fellow American bands like Swirlies or Dive have openly acknowledged the impact of Sonic Youth on their music. We want to conclude by saying that we understand that this list is not comprehensive. Even if the list featured double the amount of albums, there would still be some contributors left out. However, we'd still like to hear from you about some additional albums you think contributed to shoegaze. Before you comment, where's A. Arcane? Don't worry, just wait until the next video in the series comes out. A big shout out to our two patrons, Ray Botka and Adrian. Every dollar that you've given us has been reinvested back into the channel. As for everyone else, thanks so much for watching. You know what to do, like, subscribe, hit the bell, and join us on Patreon. Stay dreamy.